Hello everyone, this is Erika from Make Studio, and today I'm here to show you a non-standard technique for ink. It's referred to as ink washing. Ink washing is kind of a strange middle ground in between painting and drawing. Like with all kinds of painting, it requires usage of water, and as we're drawing, it can be used with specialized pens, fountain pens, quill pens, and of course, in terms of it being similar to paint, you can use brushes. Ink washing is traditionally is a technique from the East, primarily China and Japan. Ink washing has many similarities with watercolor, so upon that standpoint, I would recommend use of watercolor paper, rice paper, generally a lot of surfaces of paper that have some sort of degrees of tooth. Today, I will be doing ink wash with a sumi brush. I will be using pink ink from the Private Reserve. It is called Shell Pink. Before you do any sort of work in ink, whether it be ink washing or just any medium period where you're relying upon one color, you must sort out your values from darkest, dark, kind of dark and medium, lighter, light, and lightest. So it's always recommended that you use a palette with a certain number of different circles so you can kind of help keep things organized. And on a personal preference, I always believe it's a good idea to keep paper towels nearby. In the case of water may pool on your composition if you have too much water on your brush. And it can also be used to just blot paper off your composition in general, and sometimes be pretty good with patterning, so always good to keep in mind. The first one I would like to show you is wet on wet. You use your brush, or honestly a spray bottle could also work. But yes, you apply water to your paper. Then you apply ink to a wet surface, and you see how it flows around the paper. It gives a lower saturated, softer feel than you would with wet on dry. There's a little technique called bloom. When you use your brush to scatter out pieces of color, pieces of ink. Yes. You can pile on colors just like that. They are spread out like pools of stars. And as you can see here, from the paper, from the portion of paper that is dry, the ink just sits there, doesn't do anything. When you work in layers, you must start from the lightest to the darkest. Otherwise, your darks will just stay dark. Now, as for the second technique, dry on dry. Ensure that your brush does not have too much water on it. If you do have an excess of water, then the effects will resemble that of wet on wet. Dip your brush in water and do your best to straighten out the peak of it so that you can, actually get lines. Of course, this isn't necessary if you plan on texturing your brush with things like grass or fur. In those events, then you may actually find a benefit towards having those imprecise streakiness and lines. And of course, by keeping your brush drier, the textural component increases indeed, which can be very nice to establish a very light layer. Controlling your brush stroke in a way is similar to controlling a pencil or an ink pen or whatnot. Draw from your shoulders, not from your wrists as if you are writing. Not unless you are doing very precise details, which would require a smaller amount of space for you to achieve accuracy. Upon doing longer strokes or winding whirls, the wrist is not beneficial. You must follow through on your shoulder. Something that can be easy to forget is that with artistic mediums, there is a certain amount of muscle memory that comes in terms of your techniques, so it's always good to try to practice these. For today, I will be doing a very standard kind of abstract flair with a flower. Like I mentioned before, you must always wait for your first layer for watercolors or inks to dry before you add on another layer. Otherwise, even if it's just partially dry, you run the risk of your colors bleeding together, whether or not you have an excess of paint on your brush or not. As I've mentioned before, always work from light to dark. And that also kind of depends on what style you are utilizing as well. Are you going in for a lot of detail? Are you going in for some kind of abstraction? If you tend to be more freeform, then adding as many strokes simply isn't as important. As I mentioned, adding another layer of paints when they have not dried, it will create a splattering effect throughout your composition. However, sometimes this can very well be a beneficial thing. The difference between watercolor and ink. Watercolor is far more forgiving. Probably, most likely because, well, you can pick up your watercolors again after they've dried. But with ink, not so much. Once it's set in, it's set. Yeah, see? I believe I will come back to resume this particular composition when enough time has passed for me to be able to add on a proper second layer. Hi, I'm back, and it looks like the flower has finally dried. As I mentioned before, you can combine ink washing and either finalize your paints with one final layer of ink wash, or with ink pen / quills, whichever you have on hand. Styles are more abstract, like here. There is a minimal usage of lines, mostly just used in terms of a dividing factor for where your eyes should go, and your brain properly interprets as a flower. Well, I believe that is it for my tutorial for the ink washing technique. I hope to see you at the studio again very soon. Goodbye.